Opposing Gloves here, and this is a video on compression, what it is. This is an introduction to compression, so that as you learn about compression and what it is, I'm going to be referring to this video as I talk about like Fruity Compressor, Maximus, and other videos. And in the mixing series, I'll probably have much more advanced tutorials on compression, but I'll probably use this as a starter just to get people into compression. So what is compression? Compression is when you take the dynamic range and squish it down into a smaller dynamic range. So if you're in a space and you like yell, you are going to have probably the beginning part of your yell is going to be loud. Like you're going to go, ah! And then as you get softer, eventually you're going to have to stop yelling. And so you could either stop yelling and go, ah! And just go like that, but that's probably not very likely. You're probably going to go, ah, or something like that. And we see that we get softer. And what you can do is you could take that and you could take that yell, you could take the loud part and turn it down, like the beginning part, and make it the same level as maybe the mid part of your yell, and then turn the whole thing up so that the mid part of your yell sounds just as loud as the loud part. So that's pretty nifty. So let's talk about this in here. Now, I've tried doing this tutorial with a bunch of mixing advice. Well, not mixing advice, like things you need to know when you're mixing. But I've decided just to keep this on compression because it's just a disaster zone when I try and toss mixing into it. So here I have the greatest melody you will ever hear. And this is what it sounds like. And as you can tell, we have a problem because the greatest melody you've ever heard on the radio, this has got to be just as loud as everything else. And that's like a whole nother topic, what they do to your stuff. So once again, this weird selection problem I only have when recording. What we're going to do is we're going to compress this. But before we talk about, because I've got a Fruity Compressor out, and I'm going to use Maximus as a few visuals just to show you. We're going to compress this manually. And so there is something I'm going to tell you right now. Because I got to school and I had a teacher who said, I'm going to make you mix a song, but you can only use volume and automation. So if you wanted to use compression, which is, you don't know what it is yet, so you don't fall for these pit holes, but it could be it could ruin your mix if you overcompress. And people are going to tell you that all the time. What is compression? Well, we just talked about it, but let's do it in action. So we're going to compress this vocal without an actual compressor. We're going to create an automation clip for the volume. I'm going to make it rather large. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these parts down. I'm going to keep this part loud. I'm going to turn these parts down because they get too loud. So I don't want them that loud. So I'm going to turn them down. I am compressing them. I'm just turning the volume down on these guys so that they sound as loud as this guy. Now these are still too loud, so I'm going to just do it more. So, because I don't want it that loud, so I'm going to make it softer. Hey, and what do you know? That sounds really smooth. They all sound loud. Now, what can I do? Oh man, you guessed it. I can go in to this clip and go in and I can actually turn the volume up on this individual clip. And now the whole thing sounds loud. There's not this weird not loud part. So now watch the MIDI effects video if you're curious about how this works. So that's compression. That's what it is. Now we're going to talk about this because obviously there are plugins and things that will do this for you. But I want you to know something. You are going to spend time setting compression settings. And you could either settle with a crappy, okay compression setting that does what you want sometimes, or you could do this. I encourage you to use both. Use the compression setting when it works the best for you, but don't be afraid to go in there and do a little manual compression yourself. And it may be in the form of just turning stuff up by comparison, but that's like a whole nother thing for mixing. There's a reason why you want to attenuate things and then bring them all up. And it's just a whole nother ball game over there. That's what compression is though. There's a whole bunch of different kinds too. So there's something called limiting. So limiting is like, well, first we should talk about basic controls. So we have this thing up here. So this is a really basic compressor. It's got a threshold. And so let's get a visual on a threshold. This right here is Fruity limiter, and it has a threshold. This is the threshold, and we can move it around. It says ceiling right here, S-C-I-L, but it's essentially a threshold. And the reason it's called the ceiling is because it's a special kind of threshold. But we're going to get to that in a bit. Maybe not in this video either. Because anyways, so it basically, let's say we've got volume, and let's say our y-axis is volume. when volume passes this threshold, we're going to turn it down. And the thing about compression is compression turns it down. It lets things get louder still, but it lets them get louder slower. So let's say that like this line represents 0 decibels. And then let's say that a sound is 2 decibels. Well, we're going to set, so we've set our threshold at 0 decibels, let's just say. Now, this is just for pretend, just so we have easy numbers to work with. But because we're working in dB full scale and all these other mumbo jumbo things, this is not how it will ever work. But let's just say. And let's say that our sound is 2 decibels loud. Well, we could come over here, we could set a ratio. And what this ratio does is it says, for every 2 decibels you go past my green line, you owe me a decibel. You only get 1 decibel louder. Let's say that our sound is 4 decibels louder. It goes plus 4. So it's 4 decibels above our green line. We don't like that. So we're going to set this to 4 to 1. And we're going to say, for every 4 decibels you pass my magic green line, you only get 1 decibel louder. So because it passed our green line 4 decibels, it's only 1 decibel loud. So hopefully you're starting to see that the ratio has a dramatic effect on how fast something can get loud. When you turn the ratio up to a 10 to 1, you've effectively made a wall because decibels are logarithmic. I'm going to have a decibel video that I'm going to refer you to. It doesn't exist yet. It might not exist for a while, but you should go check it out once it exists. If you're watching this video when it's been recently published, then you're probably not going to see it. But decibels work out. Actually, I have one up. I might just redo that one in the DSP series because decibels work on a logarithmic scale. So 10 is a ton. To give you an idea of this, from 1 to 2 is like, let's say you've got, so 1 to 2, for something to double in perceived loudness, it has to double 10 decibels. That's like a general figure. So like if you hear something that's loud and you want to double that loudness, it has to go up 10 decibels. But there's a whole bunch of other things too. It gets a little complicated with distance and a whole load of things. You need to be surprised at like what double sounds like, because you might be saying, I'm going to leave it right there. I've already said too much and I haven't explained enough. So just so you know, 10 is just a very large number because it's a logarithmic scale. So now this is a limiter. So that means that when it comes up here, it's got to be 10 decibels above this to get 1 decibel louder. So it still gets louder, just really slow. Well, some people will do bang, 30 to 1. Go ahead, do it 30 times to see it happen. It's just not gonna. And they use this as a safety precaution. Some will go up to 100 to 1, and some digital even purports to go up to infinity because it's using an equation. So it's all bits, so it can arguably do infinity and all these other things. So these are used as safety precautions so your volume can't get past this wall, which is why this is called a ceiling. So that's compression on the ratio. That's our ratio. So for compressing, you're going to be using smaller ratios because you're going to be turning stuff down and then boosting it. And you're going to be setting your threshold at where you want this to happen. So we might want to set our threshold so that our green line comes right here and all this stuff gets turned down. That way we could turn it up. And that amount of attenuation, as you can see, was rather dramatic. It was a big amount of attenuation because these were at maximum. This was not at maximum. So we set our threshold to tell it where our green line is. And so that's that. Let's get the same result without the volume automation. So right now it sounds like this. And so we've got that. We're going to send it into track 1, which is where my fruity compressor's at. And we're going to accomplish the same exact thing using just the fruity compressor. So we're going to turn that on. So that's the only thing that's on. I know there's other stuff going in here. That's for just a sec. Okay. So we're going to first have to figure out where our threshold exists. And we're going to have to figure out how severely we want to compress these things. Do we want them to compress? How fast? How slow do we want it? Well, we want it to freaking stop like a wall right here. There's not like an average here. So we want it to be basically a limiter is what we want. Then we're going to turn our threshold down. I'm going to guess like 20 dB, somewhere around there. Nope, that's still way too loud. So let's go even further down to 40. Oh, I've ignored a few things. So you can hear it working. Actually, I was probably closer than I thought with 20. We have an attack and a release time. This is like how fast. So if we were to go back to our volume automation right here. Hopefully, there we go. So here's a volume automation. And we can, right now, I've essentially done it so the attack happens immediately. So this happens, and then bang, I've already turned it down, like, because I could look ahead. And in the digital domain, you'll actually see look ahead options. I can see what's going to happen before it plays, so I can turn it down before it ever even happens. So I get a perfectly compressed thing with a attack time of literally 0 seconds. But in a real compressor, it's going to pass our threshold. It's going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, and let's picture we've got an electronic compressor, like an analog one. And so it's not digital. It can't look ahead to see what the signal is going to be, especially if you haven't even played it yet. So it's got to react to it. So it can have a fast reaction time. So it could be like this. We're going to have 2 dots, and we could have a compression setting with an attack like this. So it'll turn down fast, and it might have a curve. There's all sorts of implications in that one knob, like what this shape is. It could look like that or this, or it could be anything. But it's going to turn down once it realizes that it's past the threshold. So again, if it has a look ahead setting, you could turn that on and you could achieve a perfect thing. That's only digital stuff though. So because digital is not happening in real time. So that's that. And so we could also have a long release time. So once it's past it, how do we know when to, turn the volume back up? Well, we'll set a release time to tell how long for that to happen. So we want our attack time to be rather fast, like 0 milliseconds level fast. So essentially the same thing that we've got going right here, like as fast as can be. And then we want our release time. We want our compressor to be a limiter again, because I've made a bunch of changes. I want this to be 20 dB, our threshold. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and I'm hoping this just makes sense because this is so important for mixing. So we've got this set up, and we have our attack time. So now it is essentially 0 milliseconds. So it should happen very fast. Now we have a long release time. So that means the volume, it'll stay compressed for a long time before it lets go of the volume. How fast that release happens, I have no idea. That's just how long the attack. Once it's gone beneath our threshold, once it's gone to our acceptable volume level, so it's gone under our green line, it's no longer violating the laws of the universe, it will stay down there, and our threshold will still, it's not a very trusting threshold, this one. This one will keep compressing and making sure it stays down there for a while. And once it releases, then if it goes back over, it'll attack again and drag that criminal back below the green line. So hopefully I didn't confuse you with my little story there, but hopefully you understood what I was trying to say. So we have an attack of 0, a threshold of 23 dB. Let me make sure I turn this thing on. It is on, and it is going out track 1. This is going out track not 1. So now it's going in track 1 because I didn't hear it working. So that's one thing. If you ever have to guess if your compressor is working, you better figure out a way to freaking test it, or just do some ridiculous setting where you know it has to work, because compressors are super audible. So I believe we talked about pumping. No, not yet, but okay. So we're playing it and 0, and our release is long, and it should ideally do our attenuation like a limiter. And it worked. Now it sounds like this has been attenuated too. So 23 is actually too far. We're going to want to go maybe 13. Nope, that's not far enough. Let's do like 18. It's somewhere in there. We could fine tune it, but the greatest melody in the universe is so catchy, I probably don't need to do it. Now we're going to pump the whole thing up with our gain knob. Yeah, we need to fine tune it a bit more. We need to reduce this. We could just reduce this a little bit too, I suppose, to make sure we got it. And you see, that sounds pretty darn freaking even. And that is the magic of a compressor. Now, it should be noted. Now, I'm going to talk about a few mixing things real fast. Well, one mixing thing, because when I talk about more, it just gets confusing. Let's go over to the other FL Studio. And so here's my magic voice, and I bet you didn't know it was magic. And there is the spectrum of my voice. So you should be familiar with spectrum. I'm expecting you to know this. So we know that the brighter bands are louder and the pink bands are softer. And I haven't talked about the Fletcher-Munson curve yet, but we will talk about that in when I start the audio psychoacoustics. So if that exists, if you go and look for it and it exists, watch that, because especially the one on the Fletcher-Munson curve, because that's really important. So I'm sure there are videos out there now that explain it well, but it's not my video, so I have to refer to my own videos. So it's important to know. All I want to point out here is that some parts of my voice are louder than others in the same second. So I'm going to just sing a note, ooh, and you see that on this ooh, and they're different notes, but these notes, these are very, very bright, ooh, and these ones are very dark, and it's in the same note. So you have a variation of dynamic range of frequencies. So some frequencies in your voice are louder than other frequencies in your voice. You can see some lines are darker and some lines are brighter. Now, there's a whole mess of stuff I could talk about just about this. Like, it blows my mind. But it's important to know that, because when you compress, you are changing the dynamic range, and you are therefore altering the content of this. Now, we've been doing one band. You can actually break up these frequencies and compress them individually, so you can preserve the timbral content, the relative amplitude to each other inside that space. Now, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this is nuts, but this is a big deal. There's actually, so that's where multi-band compressors come in, and that's where EQ, dynamic EQs come in, which are kind of the same thing, kind of different. But so that was something that was a little more advanced. Now I'm going to talk about one thing that is not so advanced. So we have this ratio, and we have this thing called a knee, and here they call it type. And you can have a medium, vintage, soft, hard knee, soft knee. What is this knee crap? Like, what is that? Well, I'm going to open up Maximus really fast, which is another compressor. And I'm going to set it to default. So there's our default setting. And you can see it's turning all sorts of pretty colors. So right now, volume comes in. Just to give you an idea, volume comes in, and we can set a point, and we can move this point, and we can change. We could say if any volume that reaches this point gets softer. The idea of volume mapping, if you haven't watched my Fruity Wave Shaper video, go watch, or I think it's just called the Wave Shaper. If you go watch the Wave Shaper video in the FL12 Effects series, because I explain sort of the idea. I'll cover it in the Maximus video. But this would be considered a hard knee. So once it reaches this point, bang. Actually, you know what? I could even do something like this. Once it reaches this point, the volume can no longer pass. It's essentially it's a limiter right now. And we could do something like this instead. We could go like that. This is more, well, this right here, this is a soft knee. So it's a little more forgiving. It maps volume a bit more smoothly like that. It's actually more drastic than the limiter. You could have a whole bunch of, and so you could just variate this curve. And these variations are what you would be familiar with as the types here. So we have vintage. I'm not even sure what that looks like, but you could probably figure it out from what it sounds like. Hard, soft, medium. This is a hard curve. This is more of a soft curve. If you do something like this, add a point over here. It's kind of hard to approximate just like this real fast, but you can do a soft curve. There's a soft curve, and you do all sorts of madness. So that's what this type is doing. So it's basically, we have our attack, but this allows us to control the shape of our attack, not necessarily the shape of our release. I'm not sure if it's the same as our attack. This is a basic compressor, so they don't give you control of that. Most compressors, you just have these basic knobs, especially old vintage ones. Analog ones don't give you that much control in a lot of regards. And ones that are like plugins that are replicating old ones will give you very little control. Oftentimes the threshold will have a little visual to show you the amount of attenuation going on. All right, and let's talk about this attack release deal a little more seriously right now, because this is like a big deal, guys. So let me grab that automation clip, which is this guy. You know what? Never mind. Forget about that. So we have this attack and release. And we know that if we turn this on, it's gonna let the thing pass the threshold for 127 milliseconds. And after that, 0.1. And after that, it says, freaking, I'm fed up with this guy passing my threshold of 24 decibels. So I'm gonna also set the gain back to 0. I'm tired of this guy passing my threshold. I'm gonna freaking turn that sucker down below my threshold. And then once it's past this amount of time, if it's below my threshold, I'll let it go. If it's still above, then freaking screw that guy. I'm going to keep compressing him. So that's kind of the mentality of the attack knob. So it's gonna let this guy violate his law for a little while. Now you could have 0, so it happens instantly like we talked. And so if we play it now, and I've turned the gain down, so it'll compress, but we're going to actually hear the first part of it go boop, and then it will get turned down. You'll hear it sort of as a pump. See, you go boom, boom, and it's not supposed to do that. If we turn the attack on, it compresses a lot faster. If we have a really slow attack, so maybe we've got a lazy guard, he lets everything go past. He waits freaking 400 milliseconds. What a lazy attack knob. So it doesn't even affect our stuff yet because it happens too short. And so this attack, as you can see, is really important because if you're compressing drums, if you've got, which I happen to have right here, I've got some drums, which I'll play for you in a second, but you can see we have this problem. Okay, so that's the problem number 1. So you need to be aware of that. Problem number 2, you have a release knob, and you might be thinking, how is that a problem? Well, if you have a long sample and it varies in volume, like maybe a singer, or maybe you've got some sort of string section or something, and you're compressing a variety of things, maybe you're doing some side chaining, well, this release knob becomes an issue because if it passes the threshold and it lasts the release time, the release is going to let go. And if it, for whatever reason, spikes, you're going to get this pumping effect of the attack reactivating. And it's a very undesirable thing. And in some places, it's very desirable. Maybe you want your kick to trigger the threshold, to trigger the attack on some other piece of audio. You'll see that in action on Fruity Limiter, for example, is one thing that can do that. And I'll talk about that when we get to compressors. I'll probably refer to this video. It's going to be kind of ironic. So that's that. Now let's talk about, so now you're familiar with all these controls, but let's talk about what happens with a short release time or short attack time. First off, I want to point out something. So this is what the drums sound like with no compression on at all. I gotta say, I've tried doing this video like 3 times, and this is by far the best one that I've done. So this is off right now, and here's our drums. Whoops, don't want that. So that, actually, you know what? I'm just gonna mute it. So that's our drums. So we're gonna compress them. So we're gonna turn on our compressor. I'm going to leave it on limiter just because it's the most. Actually, you know what? I'm going to turn it down to like 10-1. Still technically a limiter, but excuse me, even less than that. I'm going to go like 6. 6 is still a super high setting. You might be saying anything once it gets to 10 and above, it's all sort of the same thing. Unless you're dealing with some really weird piece of audio and you have a very unusual system. Okay, so we're going to turn our compressor on. We're going to set our threshold to be, so it triggers the kick. The kick reaches the top, so you don't have to go very far to get to the kick. We're going to do 7 decibels. So the kick's going to reach up here at the 0 marker, but we want it to, we're going to come down here to like 6 decibels. We're going to tell the kick, and anything above 7 decibels to be shut up, to go below that, be below our threshold. And we're going to have a long attack. So you know what? Nothing's going to happen. Our kick's going to, in fact, it's going to sound relatively the same because it keeps going below. Now, we got this thing going below and above, below and below. So pumping should be on drum sets. This could be a considerable issue if you're compressing. So you need to be aware of this. So, but what if we, all right, a little bit on psychoacoustics super quick. Something that's really unique about our hearing is we have this first part of a note. It's actually called the chiff. That's like, I had an instructor tell me this, and that's what they used to do, is they found that notes have this repeating cycle. There's this general, so you have an attack, and then a note has a decay, so it gets loud. This is called a transient. When a transient's a moment of excitement. In audio, it's a spike in audio. It's a moment of excitement in audio. And so here's our transient. These are our transients. And this is even considered a transient because of what's come before it. And we see that we got boom, this would be considered our attack. This is our transient. They're very, very important transients are. They found that transients, we are able to discern transients outrageously well. We've also noticed there's also a few other interesting things, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Then we have this decay, so it gets softer, and then we have a sustain. So as you see right here, it's sort of the same level, and it's a periodic waveform, so it repeats itself. It's a repeating waveform, and then it decays out. In this case, it's been compressed because decay should get softer, and this has been blowing up. So you can see that there is evidence of compression on this kick drum, which is a sample library that I bought, and it said there was compression on stuff. So this makes sense. So now again, I'm even mixing crap out of it because it gets messy when I start trying to teach like an entire course in one video. So this video is already long enough. Our ears, so this beginning part, what they used to do in old samplers was we can recognize the beginning of samples, this little area right here, as we'd call this the chiff. This area is very special. Our ears can pick it up like we're freaking hawks when it comes to this type of a thing. But there's also something else that's kind of interesting. We base loudness off of how long a sample is loud much more closely. So we get the average. So we sort of hear a sound and we get the average of how loud it stays. And then we say, oh, that's a loud sound. But if we have something that's really short like this is actually, as you can see, this does not sound as loud. Even when I play it like that, it doesn't sound as loud as the rest of the sample. And the reason for this is it's momentary spikes. And so what actually happens when you hear a spike happen that fast, you actually hear the timbre of it change. It doesn't sound louder, it just sounds different. And so when things are really loud, but for a really short amount of time, the character of the sound changes. So that's an important thing to know when we're compressing. So we want to preserve our transients. Our transients are a big deal to the way your song sounds. And you don't want to lose those. Well, and the only reason I'm telling you this right now is because we have this attack setting. And, attack's our friend. But if we set it to 0, so our compression triggers super mega quick, and it's going after our drums, we're going to lose this. It's going to get turned down. Granted, the majority of the drum will still be there. But let's say we have a very low threshold. And we have a long release, so it's actually going to stay down for a long time. So we're going to lose most of our audio if we do this. So we want a shorter release time, like maybe say 300 milliseconds. And so if we play this, what's going to happen is we're going to lose our kick. We're going to lose anything that goes up. We're going to lose our transients. So you can still hear the drums and bongo, but our kick has essentially left the room. Well, if we turn our attack up to be slower, whoa, look at that. Our kick comes back, but now we're getting that pumping effect I was talking about. We hear the kick, things get compressed down below the threshold. They wait at the appropriate amount of release, and by the time they come back up, the kick triggers again, and then they go back down, which in this case, actually, we kind of nailed the setting for what we really want. If you're looking to emphasize your kick, but the rest of your loop's gone, and you may want that loop to really be there, so that could be a problem. So, and we could adjust this, the knee or the type, and you see it's quite a bit more forgiving on vintage. This is medium, this is hard, this is soft, this one's a wimp. So, as you can see, this is a big deal because we're changing not only the volume, but we're changing the timbre, and we're changing the way we originally wanted our kick to sound. And so it's important to keep all of this in mind. So if we were to turn this all up afterwards, and then we turn this down, no more kick. Like our kick just disappeared off the map. And you might be saying there's still a kick, but that click from the kick. So if we turn our attack up, there's our kick. And so setting these settings, getting the timing right is important to avoid pumping and stuff. So that is compression. Like I know this is sort of a long video, but compression is something that needs to be I wanted to really make it very clear. This is how it is. And so if you disagree with me, if you don't think that's how it is, you can vent that in the comments, and I'm okay with that. You could just say what you think. I'm curious to see what you think about compression. Did I give it a good job? I know I haven't talked about a number of things. There's a ton more I could talk about, which is what I'm going to cover in the plugins. And when I get to the mixing series, I'm going to cover them in there too. But because look at this. This is a much more advanced compressor. It's got multiple bands, and we haven't talked about dynamic EQs at all. But for the most part, I just use Maximus. I don't even own a dynamic EQ, so I probably won't even do one until I won't do one until I buy one, and a tutorial on anything like that. But hopefully you've seen some of the implications of compression. You have a good idea of what compression is. You're going to walk away from this tutorial, and you're not going to be stupid, because I've seen a lot of tutorials out there. Because when I was new, I was looking it up, And people were just saying, just turn it down and turn it up. And it's great. Listen how great it is. It's like, no. That's not how it is. And you know about knee, ratio, gain. And so, yeah. If you do have any questions, which you probably do, because you probably heard about gates and limiters and all these other things. One other thing I'm going to point out super fast. That's another thing I'm going to toss in here. This fruity limiter, based on everything I just said, you now know that this is a limiter. It starts off like this. So it's boosting your signal, and that's a complete lie. In the mixing world, that's important to know, especially because that's going to ruin your... Why are you even moving faders if it's going to do this? So it's like all your faders are already been boosted up to the top of the knob. So most of the time, you don't even want to start a mix at this volume. You want to have mixes way lower. Like down there, start there and work your way up so you have headroom. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of philosophies about how to go about that too. So anyways, it's important to note that your limiter's there, so you might want to reset that. And you generally want to keep this on just because it's a safety, because if it goes through, you're going to get distortion, which actually is a good thing, but you may end up hurting your ears in the process. That's the bad part. So, you know, I've had problems when I was doing sound design, mostly when I'm doing experimental stuff and I don't know if it's going to blow up in my face. Maybe I turned a resonant knob on and there was a feedback loop I wasn't aware of, and my ears would, like, even with the limiter on, it's still way too loud. So anyways, subscribe and have a blessed day.
Opposing blows. Reversing.